A bride's dream becomes her most public nightmare. One moment, Ilara Vance is bathed in the cathedral's light, her hand in the grasp of billionaire titan Julian Devereux, a baby bump nestled beneath pristine white lace. The next, she's a crumpled heap on the marble floor. As panic erupts, one woman doesn't scream. She laughs. Serafina Dubois, the groom's ever-loyal assistant, watches the chaos with a triumphant smile. Because she knows a secret contained on a single sheet of paper, she's about to give the grieving groom a DNA test that will turn his world to ash and prove his perfect fairy tale was a devastating lie. The late August sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. James's Cathedral, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the opulent scene. It was a wedding ripped from the pages of a society magazine, a testament to the formidable wealth and influence of the Devereux dynasty. At the heart of it all stood Julian Devereux, a man whose name was synonymous with power in the financial world. He was impossibly handsome, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a jawline that looked as though it had been carved from granite. Today, however, that formidable exterior was softened by an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. His gaze was fixed on the woman walking towards him, down the aisle, Ilara Vance. Ilara was his antithesis, his perfect, gentle balance. Where Julian was sharp angles and cold calculation, she was soft curves and warm artistry. An art historian with a quiet passion and a smile that could disarm armies, she was the one person who saw beyond the billionaire and loved the man. Her gown, a custom Vera Wang, was a masterpiece of silk and lace designed to elegantly accommodate the soft swell of her 5-month pregnancy. This baby, this heir to the Devereux fortune, was the seal on their happiness, a tangible symbol of their all-consuming love. The guest list was a who's who of the global elite. Tech moguls from Silicon Valley mingled with European aristocracy, their hushed conversations a low hum beneath the soaring notes of the pipe organ. In the front pew, Julian's best man, Liam Sterling, beamed. Liam was more than a friend. He was Julian's business partner, the co-architect of their financial empire, and the brother Julian never had. His smile was genuine, a reflection of Julian's own happiness. Yet amidst the sea of smiling, supportive faces, one stood out for its starkly different energy. In a sleek, blood-red dress that was a bold, almost defiant statement, in a church, stood Serafina Dubois. Officially, she was Julian's chief of staff, the ruthlessly efficient woman who ran Devereux Holdings with an iron fist. Unofficially, she was the keeper of his secrets, the architect of his schedule, and for 8 long years, the woman who had believed she was the heir apparent to his life, not just his company. Serafina watched Ilara's serene progress down the aisle with an unnerving stillness. Her crimson lips were pressed into a thin, tight line, and her dark eyes held a glint of something cold and predatory. She had been there before Ilara. She had handled Julian's disastrous breakups, fielded his late-night calls, and chosen the wine for his lonely dinners. She had convinced herself that this proximity, this indispensable role, would eventually blossom into something more. She was the foundation, the steel frame of his life. Ilara was merely the decorative facade, a temporary pretty distraction. When Ilara had announced her pregnancy, Serafina had felt a physical blow, as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. It was an irrefutable fact, a biological bond that she could never compete with. From that moment, a quiet, methodical rage began to burn within her. She saw Ilara not as a rival, but as a thief who had stolen a future that was rightfully hers. And Serafina Dubois did not tolerate thieves. As Ilara reached the altar, Julian took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "You're trembling," he whispered, his voice a low, concerned rumble. "Just overwhelmed," Ilara breathed, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's all so perfect." It was perfect, too perfect. A gilded show, no matter how beautiful, was still a cage. She loved Julian with every fibre of her being, but stepping into the Devereaux world felt like stepping onto a different planet. The weight of expectation, the constant public scrutiny, the sheer scale of his life, it was dizzying. And there was a secret she and Julian shared, a fragile truth they had wrapped in layers of silence, hoping it would be strong enough to hold their new life together. The Archbishop began the ceremony, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Julian and Alara turned to face each other, their hands clasped. They were so lost in each other's eyes that they didn't see Serafina standing in the third row, her hand subtly touching the designer clutch at her side. Inside that clutch, nestled between a lipstick and a phone, was a folded piece of paper. A document she had spent a small fortune and a great deal of effort to acquire. It was her weapon, her vindication, her final, devastating move in a game only she knew she was playing. She watched the happy couple, her expression unreadable, and waited. The perfect moment was coming. The moment the altar of illusions would crumble into dust. The air in the cathedral grew thick with emotion as Julian and Alara prepared to exchange their vows. The organ music softened to a barely there whisper, and a reverent hush fell over the congregation. Julian's voice, usually so commanding in boardrooms, was thick with a vulnerability no one but Alara had ever been privy to. Alara. He began, his stormy eyes locked on hers. From the moment I met you, it was as if the world which I had only ever seen in black and white suddenly exploded into color. You brought light into my shadows. You brought peace to my chaos. You taught me that strength isn't about control, but about the courage to be vulnerable. He squeezed her hand. You have given me the greatest gift I could ever imagine. He said, his gaze dipping meaningfully to the gentle curve of her stomach before returning to her face. A family. I vow to love you, to protect you, and to honor you and our child for all the days of my life. You are my home, Alara. You always will be. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, shimmering like diamonds in the candlelight. When she spoke, her voice was a soft melodic counterpoint to his deep baritone. Julian, I never believed in fairy tales until I met you. You saw me when I felt invisible. You listened when I had no voice. You loved me for exactly who I am, not for who the world thought I should be. She took a shaky breath, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I promise to be your partner, your confidant, and your greatest champion. I promise to build a life with you, filled with laughter, truth, and unconditional love. I carry our future, and I will cherish it and you forever. The sincerity of their words was palpable, a current of pure love that flowed through the ancient stone building. The Archbishop smiled, a benevolent witness to their profound connection. By the power vested in me, he declared, his voice resonating with authority. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Julian, you may kiss your bride. A wave of joyous applause and cheers erupted from the guests. Julian cupped Alara's face in his hands, his expression one of overwhelming relief and happiness. He leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was both a tender promise and a triumphant celebration. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the perfect climax to a perfect love story. But as he pulled back, he felt a subtle shift in her. The radiant joy in her eyes was suddenly clouded by a flicker of fear. Her face, which had been flushed with love, was suddenly draining of all color, leaving her skin a stark, ghostly white against the brilliance of her dress. Alara, Julian whispered, his smile faltering. Her grip on his hands, once firm, became slack. Her eyes, which had been so full of life, went wide and then unfocused, staring at something past his shoulder, something no one else could see. I feel... She stammered, her voice a faint, breathy whisper. Her body began to sway, a graceful willow caught in a sudden violent gust of wind. Alara, Julian's voice was sharp with alarm. He tightened his grip, trying to steady her, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. Her knees buckled completely. The bouquet of white peonies and gardenias tumbled from her limp hand, scattering petals across the pristine marble floor. A collective gasp swept through the cathedral, a sharp, unified intake of breath that sliced through the celebratory atmosphere. The applause died instantly, replaced by a horrifying silence. Before anyone could react, Elara collapsed. It wasn't a slow, delicate swoon. It was a dead weight, a sudden, terrifying absence of life. She crumpled against Julian, who, despite his strength, was unprepared for the suddenness of it. He caught her breaking her fall and lowered her gently to the cold floor, his heart hammering against his ribs in a frantic, panicked rhythm. "Elara! My God, Elara, wake up!" He pleaded, his voice cracking. He knelt beside her, cradling her head, his hands patting her cheeks. "Someone call an ambulance now." Chaos erupted. Guests surged to their feet, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. Liam Sterling was instantly by Julian's side, his own face pale. "We've called Julian. They're on their way. Just stay with her." Julian barely heard him. His entire world had narrowed to the still white form of his new wife lying on the floor of the cathedral. Her pristine dress was pulled around her like a shroud. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. All the joy, all the promises, all the light of the day had been sucked into a terrifying black void. And through the rising din of panicked voices and shuffling feet, a sound cut through the air, so incongruous, so utterly monstrous, that at first Julian thought he'd imagined it. It was the sound of laughter, not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a low, controlled, and utterly triumphant chuckle. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the source of the horrifying sound. And he found it, Seraphina Dubois. She stood near the front, a stark column of crimson in a sea of pastels and black tie. While others looked on in horror, her lips were curved into a small, knowing smile. Her eyes, gleaming with a chilling victory, met his across the chaos. There was no sympathy in them, no concern. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of a predator who had just watched its trap spring shut. In that moment, Julian didn't understand why, but a sliver of ice slid into his heart. The woman who laughed at a tragedy like this was not just a spectator, she was the author. The minutes following Elara's collapse blurred into a maelstrom of controlled panic. Paramedics arrived with an efficiency that seemed to cut through the opulent chaos of the cathedral. They moved with practiced urgency, their calm professional voices a stark contrast to the frantic energy humming through the guests. Julian refused to leave Elara's side, his hand gripping hers as they lifted her onto a stretcher, his tuxedo jacket now draped over her still form. He followed them out of the grand cathedral doors, the beautiful sun-drenched day now feeling like a cruel mockery. Liam took charge, his voice a steady presence in the turmoil. "Please, everyone," he announced to the stunned guests. "The reception at the Devereux estate has been postponed. We ask for your understanding and your prayers." He managed the crowd, directed the wedding planners, and shielded his friend from the prying eyes and hushed whispers, playing the role of the loyal second-in-command to perfection. As the ambulance sped away, its siren wailing a lament that echoed through the streets of Manhattan, Julian was left standing on the cathedral steps, momentarily paralyzed. His mind was a whirlwind of terror. Was it the baby? Was it stress? A condition they didn't know about. 1,000 horrific possibilities vied for his attention, each one more terrifying than the last. He felt a hand on his arm and turned, expecting to see Liam. It was Seraphina. "Julian," she said, her voice a carefully calibrated blend of concern and intimacy. "Are you all right? This is just horrific. I'm so sorry." Her words were perfect, the kind a loyal employee would offer their distraught boss. But her eyes told a different story. The triumphant gleam he had seen inside was gone, replaced by a performance of sympathy, but he couldn't shake the chilling image of her smile. "I need to get to the hospital," he said, his voice flat and distant, shrugging off her touch. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Your driver is waiting. I've already sent him the address for Lenox Hill. I took the liberty of calling ahead, making sure the head of cardiology and the chief of obstetrics are both waiting for you. They'll give her the best care in the city." It was classic Serafina, efficient, proactive, 2 steps ahead. In any other circumstance, he would have been grateful. Today, her seamless competence felt sinister. It felt as though she had been waiting for a crisis to manage, as if this entire tragedy was just another line item on her agenda. "Thank you, Serafina." He said the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He began to walk towards his waiting Bentley, but she fell into step beside him, her heels clicking a sharp, deliberate rhythm on the stone. "Julian, wait," she said, her voice dropping lower. "There's something I think you need to see. I wasn't going to do this. I swear I was going to let it go. For your sake. But now, after this, you deserve to know the truth." Julian stopped and turned to face her, his patience worn to a razor's edge. "The truth. The truth is my wife, who is pregnant with my child, just collapsed at our wedding. That's the only truth that matters right now." "Is she pregnant with your child?" Serafina asked her question, a silken, venomous dart. The question hung in the air between them, so outrageous, so monstrously timed, that Julian could only stare at her in stunned disbelief. "What did you just say, He breathed, his voice dangerously low. "I'm sorry," she said, the insincerity dripping from every syllable. "I truly am, but I couldn't stand by and watch you be deceived. I've been watching her, Julian. The little glances, the secretive phone calls. I had my suspicions, so I hired a private investigator. A very discreet, very expensive one." She opened her crimson clutch and pulled out the folded piece of paper he had seen her touch in the church. She held it out to him. He managed to get a sample from a cup she drank from at her bridal shower, and he got a comparison sample. It wasn't hard. Julian's mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. A vindictive, jealous employee trying to destroy his happiness on the worst day of his life. "This is insane, Serafina. You're fired. Get out of my sight." He turned to leave again, but her next words froze him in his tracks. The comparison sample was from Liam Sterling. The name hit him like a physical blow. Liam, his best friend, his brother. The man standing beside him at the altar, beaming with joy. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. A desperate, pathetic attempt to sow chaos. "You're a liar," Julian snarled, his voice a low growl. "Am I?" Serafina's feigned sympathy was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "Look at the paper, Julian. It's from a certified lab. A paternity test. It proves with 99.99% certainty that the father of Elara Vance's baby is Liam Sterling." She pushed the document into his hand. "She's been playing you both, probably laughing about it behind your back. Maybe this whole collapse is just a show. A bid for sympathy when she knew the truth was about to come out." His hands trembled as he held the paper. It felt toxic, radioactive. He didn't want to look. He knew that looking would be like opening Pandora's box, releasing a horror he could never put back. But he had to. His mind, the logical, evidence-based mind of a financial genius, needed to see the data. Slowly, he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the clinical, black-and-white text, the scientific jargon, the percentages and genetic markers. And then, he saw it. The names, stark and undeniable. Mother Elara Vance, alleged Father Julian Devereux. Conclusion, probability of paternity or it. Then the second section, subject Elara Vance Boyne's fetus. Subject Liam Sterling. Conclusion, Probability of paternity, 99.997%. The world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the city faded into a dull roar. The solid ground beneath his feet felt like quicksand. Every cherished memory of the past year. His proposal to Alara, her joyful tears when she told him she was pregnant, their late-night talks about baby names. Liam clapping him on the back in celebration. It all curdled and soured, replaying in his mind as scenes from a grotesque fuss. He looked up from the paper, his eyes finding Seraphina's. The mask was completely gone now. Her face was alight with pure, unadulterated triumph. She had him. She had destroyed his world with a single piece of paper. "She played you, Julian," Seraphina whispered, stepping closer, her voice like the hiss of a serpent. "She's a common little actress who saw a meal ticket. But don't worry, I'm here. I'll help you clean up the mess. I always do." Julian said nothing. He simply stared at her, the DNA test clutched in his hand. The grief and fear he had felt for Alara were being rapidly consumed by a new towering emotion, a cold, black, all-consuming rage. The rage of a man who has just learned his entire life is a lie. The drive to Lenox Hill Hospital was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Julian sat in the plush, leather-back seat of his Bentley, the city's familiar skyline, a meaningless, blurry backdrop to his internal devastation. The DNA test lay on the seat beside him, a white rectangle of pure poison. He didn't look at it, but he could feel its presence, its weight, as if it were a physical entity radiating cold. His mind, typically a fortress of logic and decisive action, had become a battlefield. One part of him, the part that loved Alara, screamed that it was a trick, a forgery, a cruel, elaborate scheme by a jealous woman. Seraphina was ambitious and ruthless. He'd always known that. He'd even admired it in a professional context. Was she capable of this, of orchestrating such a diabolical lie? But the other part of his mind, the cold, analytical part that had built his empire, was methodically connecting the dots. Alara's nervousness at the altar, was it overwhelming love or crippling guilt? Her secretive phone calls, which she'd brushed off as conversations with her mother or the wedding planner, were they hushed whispers to her lover, Liam's unrestrained joy for them. Was it the happiness of a best friend or the smug satisfaction of a man who had cuckolded a king? Every interaction was now suspect, every memory tainted. He remembered an evening a few months ago finding Alara and Liam laughing together in the library of his estate. At the time, it had warmed his heart to see the two most important people in his life getting along so well. Now the memory was hideous. What had they been laughing about? Him, their shared deception. By the time the car pulled into the private entrance of the hospital, Julian had transformed. The panicked, grieving husband had been replaced by something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. The emotional warmth Alara had brought into his life had been extinguished, leaving behind the icy pragmatism that had made him a titan of Wall Street. He was no longer a husband. He was an investor who had discovered his most valuable asset was a fraud. He strode through the pristine corridors, his face a mask of stone. A nurse intercepted him, her expression soft with practiced sympathy. "Mr. Devereux, your wife is stable. The doctors are with her now. It appears she had a severe panic attack complicated by her pregnancy. We're running tests, but mother and baby are both resting." The news that she and the baby were safe, which should have brought him overwhelming relief, barely registered. The word baby was a stab wound. Her baby. Liam's baby. "I want to see her," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He was led to a private suite, a luxurious room that looked more like a hotel than a hospital. Alara was lying in the bed, looking small and fragile against the crisp, white sheets. She was awake, her eyes fluttering open as he entered. A heart monitor beeped a steady rhythm beside her. "Julian," she whispered, her voice weak. A look of profound relief washed over her face. "You're here. I was so scared. I don't know what happened. One minute we were kissing and the next—" He didn't move towards her. He didn't take her outstretched hand. He stood at the foot of the bed, a sentinel of judgment, his presence sucking the warmth from the room. The shift in him was so palpable that Ilara's expression faltered her relief, turning to confusion and then fear. "Julian, what is it? What's wrong?" Silently, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the DNA test. He unfolded it deliberately, the crinkling of the paper sounding like thunder in the quiet room. He held it up for her to see. "I believe this is what's wrong," he said, his voice as cold and sharp as breaking glass. Ilara squinted, trying to read the text from across the room. She couldn't make out the words, but she saw the official letterhead of the laboratory, the columns of data. A dawning horror spread across her features. What is that?" she asked, though the tremor in her voice suggested she already knew. "It's a truth serum, apparently," Julian replied, his tone dripping with acidic sarcasm. "It's a paternity test, Ilara, one that tells me I have a 0% chance of being the father of the child you're carrying." He let the words hang in the air, watching as every trace of color drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, translucent white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. A look of pure, unadulterated terror filled her eyes, the look of someone whose most carefully guarded secret had just been detonated. He took a step closer, his own pain now twisting into a cruel, interrogating fury. "My only question is how long have you been laughing at me? Was it from the beginning? Was I always just the fool, the rich, stupid fool who would give you and your lover's child his name and his fortune?" "Julian, no, please," she began, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. It's not what you think." "Oh, I think it's exactly what I think," he snarled, tossing the paper onto the bed beside her. It landed softly. On the crisp sheets, a stark black and white indictment. It says, "The father is Liam Sterling. Liam, my best friend. My brother. Did you enjoy it? Did you two have a good laugh every time I talked about my future son? My heir?" The beeping of the heart monitor quickened its steady rhythm, becoming frantic and erratic. A nurse rushed in, alerted by the change. "Sir, you need to calm down. You're upsetting her." Julian ignored her. His entire focus was on the woman in the bed, the woman who had shattered his world. He looked at her and the tears carving paths through her makeup, at her trembling body, and he felt nothing. The love was gone, cauterized by the searing heat of betrayal. All that remained was a vast, empty chasm. "Get your story straight, Ilara," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Because my lawyers will be in touch. You will not get a single cent from me, and you will never see me again." He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing the frantic beeping of the heart monitor, the only soundtrack to the complete and utter unraveling of his life. He didn't look back. Julian left the hospital in a daze of cold fury. He didn't go home to the sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse he was supposed to share with his new bride. He went to his office. The headquarters of Devereux Holdings was a silent, empty skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass testament to his power. It was his fortress, his sanctuary of logic and control, and right now it was the only place he could breathe. He went straight to the bar in his panoramic corner office and poured a tumbler of Macallan's and the amber liquid, doing little to warm the ice that had formed in his veins. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the glittering, indifferent city below. He had conquered this city. He had bent it to his will. Yet, he had been brought to his knees by a soft-spoken art historian and the man he called a brother. The betrayal was a hydra, each head more monstrous than the last. There was the infidelity, the ultimate personal violation. There was the public humiliation, the collapsed bride, the cancelled wedding, that would be gossip fodder for years. And then there was Liam. This was the wound that cut the deepest. Julian had trusted Liam with his business, his secrets, his life. He had loved him. The thought of Liam's hands on Ilara, of their shared secret, their shared laughter at his expense, was a visceral, violent poison. He needed a confession. Not from Ilara, her terrified silence in the hospital was confession enough. He needed to hear it from Liam. He needed to see the guilt in his friend's eyes to force the lie from his lips. He picked up his phone and sent a single text to Liam. "My office. Now." 40 minutes later, Liam Sterling strode into the office, his face etched with worry. He had clearly rushed from the wedding venue, his tuxedo slightly disheveled. "Julian, thank God," he said, breathing a sigh of relief. "I've been calling you. How is she? Is Ilara okay? What did the doctors say?" Julian turned slowly from the window, his face unreadable. He took a slow sip of his scotch, savouring the burn, letting the silence stretch, turning the tension in the room into a palpable force. Liam's smile faltered under the weight of Julian's cold stare. "Jules, what is it you're scaring me?" "Sit down, Liam," Julian said, his voice quiet but laced with menace. Liam hesitated, then sank into one of the leather chairs opposite Julian's massive desk. Julian walked over and placed the folded test on the polished mahogany between them. "What's this?" Liam asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Open it," Julian commanded. With a growing sense of dread, Liam picked up the paper and unfolded it. He read it once, then a second time, his face draining of all colour. He looked up at Julian, his eyes wide with a complex emotion Julian couldn't immediately decipher. It wasn't just guilt, it was panic, fear. "Julian, where did you get this?" Liam stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Does it matter?" Julian shot back, leaning forward, his hands flat on the desk. "The only thing that matters is what's written on it. Is it true?" Liam stared at the paper, then back at Julian. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was his answer, the confirmation Julian craved and dreaded in equal measure. "You son of a bitch!" Julian whispered the words, trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. He walked around the desk, his movements slow and deliberate like a predator circling its prey. "In my house, with my fiancée, carrying your child while she agreed to marry me." "Julian, it's not like that," Liam pleaded, rising from his chair. "You have to let me explain. There's more to this. A reason. A reason." Julian's voice exploded in a roar that echoed through the empty office. "What possible reason could you have for betraying me like this? Money, did you want my company so bad you'd steal my life too?" In that moment, a decade of brotherhood and trust evaporated, replaced by the primal fury of a man betrayed on the most fundamental level. Julian lunged his fist, connecting with Liam's jaw in a sickening crack. Liam staggered back, tripping over a chair and crashing to the floor. He made no move to fight back, simply looking up at Julian, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "I deserved that," Liam said, his voice raspy. "But you are not listening. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Julian snarled, standing over him, his chest heaving. "I understand that my entire life for the past year has been a lie. I understand that the two people I trusted most in this world were conspiring behind my back. Get out." "Julian, please. Get out!" Julian bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Get out of my building, out of my company, and out of my life. If I ever see you again, I will kill you." Liam slowly, painfully picked himself up. He looked at Julian, his eyes filled with a desperate, unspoken plea. But Julian's face was a mask of impenetrable hatred. Defeated, Liam turned and walked out of the office, the heavy glass door swinging shut behind him, with a soft, final whoosh. Julian stood alone in the center of his empire, surrounded by the trappings of his success. But he had never felt more bankrupt. He had lost his wife, his child, and his best friend in the space of a few hours. The silence of the office closed in on him, vast and absolute. He returned to the bar, pouring another drink and then another. He was numb. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Ilara lay in the sterile quiet of her room. The damning document lay on her bedside table where Julian had thrown it. She stared at it, tears blurring her vision. "It's not what you think," she had told him, but how could he think anything else? The evidence was absolute. Her desperate plea for him to listen had been drowned out by the roar of his pain. Her confession, the one he had demanded, was far more complex than a simple yes or no. The truth was a delicate, fragile thing, a secret she had promised to keep, a sacrifice she had agreed to make for the man she loved. But now that secret had been twisted into a weapon by an unknown enemy and used to destroy them. Julian thought he had uncovered the truth, but he had only seen the surface of a much deeper, more heartbreaking story. As she lay there, the frantic beeping of the monitor having settled back into a steady rhythm, she knew she had not only lost her husband, but also the beautiful, complicated truth she had been protecting. Her confession was shattered before she even had a chance to speak it. Days bled into a week of desolate, alcohol-fueled solitude. Julian barricaded himself in his penthouse, a ghost haunting the opulent rooms that should have been filled with the laughter of a newly married couple. He had instructed his lawyers to begin divorce proceedings, to draw up an ironclad agreement ensuring Ilara Vance would receive nothing. He had initiated a hostile takeover of Liam's shares in the company, a brutal, merciless campaign to erase his former friend from his life completely. He was a man on autopilot, driven by a cold, surgical rage. Serafina was his only point of contact with the outside world. She managed everything with her chilling efficiency, filtering his calls, handling the press, who were having a field day with the runaway bride narrative, and delivering filtered summaries of company business. She would appear at his door with files and food. He wouldn't eat, her expression a perfect mask of concern, but her eyes held a quiet satisfaction. She was consolidating her power, stepping into the vacuum Liam and Ilara had left. She was winning. One rainy afternoon, Julian found himself in the library, a room Ilara had painstakingly redesigned. He had been avoiding it. It was too full of her. Her scent lingered on the leather chairs. Her favorite books on Renaissance art were still stacked on the side table. His eyes fell upon a small, ornate rosewood box on the mantelpiece. It was their box, a place where they kept mementos, a ticket stub from their first date, a dried rose from their first anniversary, a silly photo from a trip to the coast. Driven by some self-destructive impulse, he picked it up, intending to throw it into the fireplace. He opened the lid, and his eyes fell upon a photograph of him and Ilara, taken on the day they found out she was pregnant. They were both beaming their happiness, so pure, so absolute it felt like a punch to the gut. Beneath the photo was a collection of other items, and underneath them all, an envelope. It was thick, creamy stationery, and on the front, in Ilara's elegant script, was written, "For Julian, to be opened on our son's 18th birthday." A fresh wave of fury washed over him, a letter for their son, or her son. He ripped it open, ready to be sickened by whatever sentimental lies she had written. But it wasn't a letter. It was a sheaf of medical documents. He stared at them, his brow furrowed in confusion. The letterhead was from the New York Fertility Institute. The top page was a letter addressed to him, Mr. Julian Devereux. The date on it was from over a year ago, before his proposal to Ilara, before she had even moved in. His hands shaking, he began to read. It was a final report from a battery of tests he had undergone. He vaguely remembered it now, a full executive physical he had done, part of a new wellness program for the company. He'd barely glanced at the results, letting his doctors give him the all clear. But this was a specialist's report they had forwarded. He scanned the medical jargon, his mind struggling to process the words. Then he saw the conclusion circled in red ink by the doctor. Diagnosis: azoospermia. Complete absence of sperm in ejaculate. Infertility. absolute and irreversible. The Scotch glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. He didn't notice. He sank into a chair, the documents trembling in his hand. It all came rushing back to him in a tidal wave of memory he had buried deep beneath layers of denial and pain. He remembered the crushing weight of that diagnosis, the shame, the feeling of being fundamentally broken. Devereux men were builders' patriarchs. They created legacies, and he couldn't. His pride, his massive, suffocating pride, had forbidden him from telling anyone except Alara. He remembered her reaction. She hadn't pitied him. She had held him, kissed him, and told him, "I love you, Julian, not your DNA. We will find a way. We will be a family." And they had. They had found a way. A desperate secret, an incredibly fragile way. The memory of the conversation was so vivid, it was as if it were happening right now. He and Alara sitting in this very library. And Liam. Liam was there too. "I can't believe you're asking me this," Liam had said, his face pale with shock. "I'm not asking you as a business partner," Julian had replied, his voice strained. "I'm asking you as my brother. There is no one else on this earth I would trust. I want my child to have your heart, your loyalty. I want them to have the best parts of the man I admire most." It had been their sacred pact, a clinical procedure, an anonymous donation on paper, but a profound act of love and friendship in reality. They had all agreed to take the secret to their graves. The baby would be a Devereux raised as Julian's biological son, the true heir to the empire. The world would never know. They had done it for him, to protect his pride, to protect the Devereux legacy. Alara's collapse at the wedding, it wasn't guilt. It was the sheer terrifying stress of their secret colliding with the public finality of their vows, the fear of being discovered, the weight of the lie they were all carrying for his sake, and the DNA test. Julian's blood ran cold. Serafina, she must have suspected something was amiss, but she couldn't have possibly known the truth. She had dug for dirt, expecting to find a simple tawdry affair. And when she found evidence of Liam's paternity, she had interpreted it through the lens of her own bitter jealousy. She hadn't uncovered the truth. She had uncovered a single isolated fact and twisted it into the most damaging lie imaginable. She hadn't exposed Alara's infidelity. She had weaponized their secret against them, without even knowing what that secret was. The rage returned, but it was different now. It was not the blind, wounded fury of a betrayed husband. It was the focused, ice-cold wrath of a king whose family had been attacked, whose most loyal subjects had been wrongly condemned by his own hand. He hadn't been betrayed by Alara and Liam. He had betrayed them. He had let his pride and his pain blind him to the truth he had known all along. He had accused his loyal wife of the worst possible sin and assaulted the man who had given him the greatest gift. He looked at the shattered glass on the floor, then at the documents in his hand. The unspoken truth. It had been there all along, buried by his own grief. And in that moment, Julian Devereux knew what he had to do. The unravelling was over. It was time for a reckoning. The storm that had been brewing inside Julian coalesced into a singular, razor-sharp purpose. He moved with a speed and decisiveness that had been absent for the past week. First, he called the head of security at Devereux Holdings. "I want every piece of digital correspondence from Serafina Dubois' office for the past 6 months. Emails, encrypted messages, server logs. I also want a record of all financial transactions tied to her corporate accounts, specifically payments to private investigation firms. You have 1 hour." Next, he called his legal team. "Cancel the divorce proceedings immediately and halt all action against Liam Sterling's shares. Draft a public apology and a press release retracting all prior statements. I'll dictate the contents shortly." The final call was the hardest. He dialed the private number for Alara's hospital room. A nurse answered. "She's sleeping, Mr. Devereux. She's been through a lot." "Don't wake her," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just Tell her I'm coming, and tell her I'm sorry." An hour later, Julian strode into the boardroom on the 50th floor. His executive team was assembled, summoned for an emergency meeting. Serafina sat at the head of the table in the seat reserved for the chief of staff, looking poised and in control. She gave Julian a small conspiratorial smile as he entered the look of a co-conspirator. The sight of it made his stomach churn. "Thank you all for coming," Julian began, his voice resonating with its old authority. "This meeting is to address a serious breach of security and ethics within this company. It has come to my attention that a senior executive has been using corporate funds to conduct personal surveillance and has actively engaged in corporate espionage by accessing sensitive competitor data through illicit means." A confused murmur went through the room. Serafina's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Julian's head of security entered and handed him a tablet. Julian glanced at it. Then his cold eyes locked onto Serafina. "The executive in question is you, Serafina." Her face went pale. "Julian, what are you talking about? This is absurd." "Is it?" Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. He projected the tablet screen onto the wall monitor. A list of wire transfers appeared, payments to a notorious private investigator. Then a series of emails showing Serafina accessing proprietary data from the servers of their chief rival, a project Liam had been heading. "You weren't just investigating Alara, you were setting Liam up to take a fall for corporate espionage you committed, weren't you? A 2-for-1 deal. Get rid of the wife and the best friend, leaving the path clear for you." Serafina stood up, her composure cracking. "This is a fabrication. You can't prove any of it." "I don't have to," Julian said coldly. "What I can prove is that you deliberately and maliciously interfered in my private life, using illegally obtained information to destroy my marriage. The rest is a matter for the authorities." He nodded to the security guards at the door. "Serafina Dubois is terminated effective immediately. Escort her from the building. She is to take nothing with her. Her access is revoked. She is a hostile entity." Serafina stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You're choosing her. After what she did, after she cheated on you with your best friend." Julian took a step towards her, his voice dropping so low only she could hear it. "She never cheated. The baby she is carrying is a gift that you in your twisted ambition tried to turn into a curse. You saw a puzzle, but were too stupid and arrogant to see the full picture. You didn't just fail to win, Serafina. You fundamentally misunderstood the game." The look of utter defeat on her face was his final victory over her. As security led her away, protesting and threatening lawsuits, Julian felt no satisfaction, only a profound emptiness. He had cleaned his house, but his home was still broken. He drove to the hospital, his heart heavy with a dread that was worse than the anger he'd felt before. What if she wouldn't forgive him? What if the cruel, hateful things he had said had shattered her love for him irrevocably? He paused outside her hospital room door and took a deep breath. When he walked in, Alara was sitting up in bed, looking pale but composed. And sitting in a chair beside her, holding her hand, was Liam. His jaw was bruised, and he looked forward, but his expression was one of quiet loyalty. He was here protecting her. Liam saw Julian and stood up, a flicker of defensiveness in his eyes. Julian looked from the bruise on his friend's face to the pain in Alara's eyes, and the full weight of his catastrophic failure crashed down on him. "Liam," Julian said, his voice cracking. I am so sorry for what I did, for what I said, for everything." Liam just nodded, his own eyes glistening. "She told me you knew. She always believed you'd remember." Julian then turned to Alara. She watched him, her face unreadable, her heart guarded. He walked to her bedside and fell to his knees, taking her hand in his. It was a complete surrender, the proud billionaire utterly humbled. "Alara," he began, tears streaming down his face for the first time in his adult life. "There are no words. There is no excuse. My pride, my ego. I was so blinded by the pain of a betrayal that I didn't even stop to consider it was a lie. I forgot our truth. I forgot my promise to you. I took the most beautiful secret, our secret, and I let her turn it into something ugly. The things I said to you, they were monstrous, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Elara looked at him, at the broken, remorseful man on his knees before her. She saw the husband she had fallen in love with, the man who had been hiding behind a mask of cold fury. Slowly, she reached out her other hand and placed it on his head, her fingers running through his hair. "You were hurt, Julian," she whispered, her own tears beginning to fall. "She hurt us all, but our foundation, what we built together, it has to be stronger than her hate." And he looked up, hope dawning in his eyes. "Can you forgive me?" She gave him a small, watery smile. "I already have. We're a family, Julian, in all our beautiful, complicated truth, and families forgive." Liam put a hand on Julian's shoulder, and the three of them stayed there for a long moment, a triangle of forgiveness and redemption. The wedding had been a disaster, their secrets brutally exposed and twisted. But they had survived, their unconventional family forged in a crucible of love, sacrifice, and a terrible misunderstanding, was battered but unbroken. They would leave the hospital together, ready to face the world, not with a lie but with a truth that was more powerful and profound than any simple fairy tale. That was the incredible story of the Devereux wedding, a day that began with a vow and ended with a reckoning. It's a powerful reminder that the truth is often far more complex than it appears, and that secrets, even those kept with the best intentions, can become weapons in the wrong hands. Julian, Elara, and Liam's journey was a roller coaster of love, devastating betrayal, and ultimately hard-won redemption. It proves that true strength isn't about having a perfect life, but about having the courage to rebuild one from the ashes of lies, and that forgiveness is the most powerful force of all. If this story of shattered illusions and unbreakable bonds moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story that's more than meets the eye. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the most dramatic, real-life stories. What did you think of Serafina's ultimate plan? Let us know in the comments below.